feeling like I'm trapped in my damn mind. Tell the feeling like I'm rapping a damn lie. Tell the feeling like my life is a damn game.
Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a psychological thriller film, Stay. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a man sitting next to a car crash on the Brooklyn Bridge. He sits there for a bit, and when the sirens wail, he stands up and walks away from the scene, oddly calm for a person who just witnessed an accident. Then the scene transitions to another man, a psychiatrist, waking up while holding an engagement ring. After that, he meets up with his girlfriend, who is an artist, before leaving for work. Following that, the psychiatrist walks into an office where he meets his patient, the guy who witnessed the accident earlier. The patient quickly gives a rude attitude to the psychiatrist upon seeing him, because he is suspicious of why his former doctor suddenly became sick and left without notice. The psychiatrist reads from the file that the patient is a college student majoring in art. Also, one of the things written in the document is that the patient torched his car, so the psychiatrist asks him about it. However, the patient does not remember much about the incident and gives unclear answers. Despite the sunny weather, the patient then leaves, saying he needs to go home before the hailstorm begins. Afterward, while the psychiatrist is outside with his girlfriend, the rain starts pouring on them, so they immediately run inside a building. Meanwhile, the patient is on the train, smoking a cigar. A professor from his university is also on the train and nags the patient for illegally smoking on public transportation. The patient silently obliges and puts the cigarette right on his arm, gathering strange looks from the people. On the other hand, the psychiatrist tries to contact his colleague, who handles the patient's case, but his message goes straight to voicemail. The following day, the patient makes a sudden visit to the psychiatrist's office. Despite the unexpected visit and another patient coming any second, the psychiatrist entertains the patient and talks to him about the exact weather he predicted yesterday. The patient says that he does not understand the weatherman and suddenly reveals that he hears voices in his head. The psychiatrist gives the patient a paper and pen to write what the voices are saying, but the patient struggles to differentiate imagination from reality. Then, the psychiatrist sees burn marks on the patient's arm and asks him about it. However, the patient changes the subject and reveals his plan to kill himself on Saturday at midnight. The psychiatrist quickly holds the phone, taking action, but the patient stops him and reassures the psychiatrist that he will not harm himself before Saturday, and then he leaves. Later that day, after discussing the patient's case with a colleague, the psychiatrist goes home to his girlfriend. The girlfriend persuades him to share the progress with the patient's case. Despite refusing a couple of times, the psychiatrist shares the confidential information in the end. The morning after, the psychiatrist visits the patient at his university. After the patient's class, the psychiatrist revisits their last conversation about suicide. The patient shares that he will follow in the footsteps of his favorite 20th century artist who killed himself on his 21st birthday. The psychiatrist then mentions the patient's parents, hoping to change the patient's decision. However, the patient replies that his parents are already dead in a pained tone, so the psychiatrist quickly apologizes. The psychiatrist then asks if the patient has a girlfriend, which the patient indirectly admits. The patient talks about the waitress he met at a diner, who was kind to him. The patient was supposed to ask the waitress to marry him, but he did not do it for an unknown reason, and now the waitress is somewhere else. After that, the psychiatrist goes to his girlfriend's studio and confronts her about her mental health medication. It turns out the psychiatrist's girlfriend has stopped taking pills, but she pleads with him to trust her that she will not hurt herself again. The two make up, and as he walks away, the psychiatrist hears his girlfriend calling him by the patient's name. In shock, the psychiatrist looks at her, but the girlfriend denies it, so the psychiatrist apologizes and leaves. The next day, the psychiatrist bonds with a blind patient by playing mental chess. Just then, the patient walks into the room, startling the psychiatrist. The blind man kindly introduces himself, but upon seeing him, the patient starts crying because he is appalled to see a familiar face. The blind man excuses himself to leave, and the patient immediately informs the psychiatrist that the blind man is actually his father. However, shocked by the revelation, the psychiatrist says the blind man does not have any children, and that, according to the patient, his parents are dead. The patient angrily argues with the psychiatrist, overwhelmed by the events. The patient suddenly blurts out a quotation and leaves the psychiatrist. Later that day, the psychiatrist goes to the patient's apartment with some colleagues and the building's locksmith. However, instead of finding the patient, they find the words "Forgive me" covering all the walls and a box of bullets. They also find a recorded message containing the voices of the patient and someone who sounds exactly like the psychiatrist. However, the psychiatrist denies any involvement and leaves. That night, the psychiatrist talks to his girlfriend about his latest encounter with the patient. The girlfriend, a survivor of suicide, offers to talk to the patient once he is found. However, the psychiatrist refuses that to happen because it violates the ethical code, and instead, he asks for advice on how to change the patient's mind. Following that, the psychiatrist visits the patient's former doctor and finds her disoriented and sluggish in her apartment. The doctor is mumbling incoherent phrases because of drinking and taking pills. Surprisingly with her state, the doctor manages to give him the information about the patient's mother. After that, the psychiatrist searches for the mother and finds her in an empty house with her dog. The psychiatrist tries to get information to find the patient, but the mother confuses the psychiatrist's identity with her son. So instead, the psychiatrist pretends to be the patient to trick the mother to answer his questions. Finally, the mother mentions the same waitress that the patient once said to the psychiatrist. Suddenly, the mother's head starts to bleed, but she does not seem to be in pain. The psychiatrist attempts to help the mother, but the dog suddenly bites his arm. The following moment, he goes to a clinic to get his wound treated. Then a sheriff comes in and interrogates the psychiatrist. The sheriff is curious to know why the psychiatrist was at the house and who he was talking to. So the psychiatrist explains what happened, but the sheriff informs him that he knows the patient's mother and she died months ago, together with her husband in a car wreck. The sheriff then bids goodbye and leaves. Meanwhile, while drinking, the patient experiences hallucinations in a cabaret bar. The patient's mind plays with him. He hallucinates various pictures of himself with his family and a woman. Some are happy photographs, but some are disturbing with his parents in blood. The patient could only cry as it happened. The following day, the psychiatrist experiences something like déjà vu. The psychiatrist is confused and asks the people involved, but they dismiss him. After that, the psychiatrist goes home to his girlfriend, who immediately asks for an explanation for his sudden disappearance. Still bewildered, the psychiatrist shares that he might be experiencing the conditions his patients experienced. The psychiatrist sees dead people, witnesses events and scenes that have already happened, playing again. The girlfriend calms the psychiatrist down and lets him sleep. Not long after, the psychiatrist wakes up and immediately proceeds to find the patient. However, the patient has been outside the apartment for hours, waiting for the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist offers the patient to come with him, but the patient refuses. The psychiatrist then mentions his encounter with the patient's mother last night, catching the patient's attention. The patient follows the psychiatrist outside of the building as they talk about the patient's mother. The psychiatrist attempts to persuade the patient to change his mind about killing himself. The psychiatrist even mentions his girlfriend's words, but the patient has made up his mind. The psychiatrist then tries to stop the patient from leaving, but the patient puts out his gun, points it at the psychiatrist while holding him. Then the patient confesses that he killed his parents, and for that, is going to hell. The patient then puts down his gun and leaves the shocked psychiatrist. The psychiatrist tries to find the patient, but he is already gone. So he proceeds to find the waitress the patient's talking about. The psychiatrist goes from diner to find the waitress, but fails to find her. Finally, at the last restaurant, the psychiatrist gets information from a former co-worker of the waitress. According to her, the waitress resigned and now pursues acting. The co-worker asks for a drug prescription from the psychiatrist in exchange for where he could find a waitress. Later, the psychiatrist finds the waitress in an old building, reading lines from the famous Hamlet with another man. After their rehearsal, the psychiatrist introduces himself and reveals the purpose of his visit. The psychiatrist mentions the patient, but the waitress informs the psychiatrist that she does not know the patient personally. The waitress then shares that she saw the patient at an art store before and offers to take the psychiatrist there. They go down the spiral staircase, but the waitress suddenly disappears after a while. The psychiatrist slips onto the stairs while finding the waitress. After getting back on his feet, the psychiatrist goes back up into the rehearsal room and finds the waitress reading lines with a man, just like the first time he encountered her. The psychiatrist immediately goes back down again, befuddled by the happenings. Meanwhile, the patient goes to his so-called father's apartment, the blind man. The blind man instructs the patient to leave, but instead of doing that, he covers the blind man's eyes and pleads with him to look at him. Miraculously, the blind man can see again, but fails to recognize the patient. However, the patient hugs the blind man, kisses him on the head, bids goodbye, and leaves. That rainy night, the psychiatrist continues to search for the patient and finds the art bookshop the waitress is talking about. The store owner talks to the psychiatrist about the patient and informs him that the patient bartered his artwork for some books about his favorite artist. At the same time, the patient just got off the bus near the Brooklyn Bridge. He goes to a dance class to watch the waitress, the woman he fell in love with. The patient just stands there in the rain, watching the waitress for the last time. After leaving the art store, the psychiatrist calls his girlfriend and asks about the patient's favorite artist. The girlfriend says that the patient's favorite artist shot himself at the Brooklyn Bridge on his 21st birthday. After learning that, the psychiatrist says a goodbye message to his girlfriend and ends the call. After the call, the girlfriend notices the patient's name at the back of her bought canvas painting. She then searches the other paintings and finds a few of the patient's artworks. The girlfriend realizes that the patient plans to kill himself on the Brooklyn Bridge, an imitation of the patient's favorite artist. Meanwhile, the psychiatrist bumps into the blind man, and the psychiatrist is shocked to see him having vision. The man shares that the patient healed him and that the world is an illusion. The psychiatrist asks for the time, and the man says less than 30 minutes before 12 midnight, so the psychiatrist quickly runs away. On the other hand, a strange thing happened to the patient. While on the streets, everything suddenly stops moving, and the patient's head starts to bleed. The vehicles stop moving, and the people are in a frozen position, looking at the patient as blood drops from his head. The patient calmly wipes the blood and leaves. The following moment at the train station, the psychiatrist sees the patient on a different train. Right after that, the psychiatrist quickly runs to the Brooklyn Bridge, and he finds the patient there. The psychiatrist admits that he does not know what is real anymore. The patient replies that the psychiatrist is real and was just trying to help him, but the psychiatrist is too late to save him. The patient says that the world is a dream, and despite the psychiatrist's attempt to change his mind, the patient puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Suddenly, the car crash from the first scene replays, only now with a commotion. A man is lying on the ground, fatally wounded from the accident. The wounded man is revealed to be the patient. A nurse helps put pressure on the patient's wounds, while the doctor checks the other people in the car for signs of life. The patient suffers from a survivor's guilt, so his mind played a trick on him and made him spend his final moments in a dream, where he is burdensome with mental health problems. All the people from his dream reappear. It turns out in his dream world, the doctor and the nurse helping the man are the psychiatrist and his girlfriend, while others are the witnesses of the accident. The doctor and the nurse help the man as they wait for the ambulance. With his last breath, the man imagines the nurse as his girlfriend and proposes to her, which the nurse accepts out of sympathy. Some of the onlookers cry, witnessing a heartbreaking scene before them, while the others return to their vehicles. The film ends with the ambulance and the police arriving at the scene, interviewing witnesses, and taking care of the corpse. Meanwhile, the doctor asks the nurse out for a coffee, saying that he cannot sleep after what just happened. This is Daniel CC Boogie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.